Well, hello everybody. My name is Jason DeCosta, and thank you for joining me today on my show called Consistent Preterism. Please do not mind the echoing, rattling sound. I am currently driving a cargo van for my job, and it's a long story, so don't ask. But anyways, hopefully it comes out well enough where it's not too painful to listen to. But today I wanted to do a brief talk on the new covenant and why a new and better covenant makes no sense. And this has been on my mind for a long time. I've mentioned it a few times in the past on previous audios, and I think it deserves to be brought up again because it's a very powerful point. When, or I should say, if you know anything about Israel's old covenant that is outlined and described and depicted in the Old Testament, and also that is outlined, depicted, and finished off in the New Testament, then you know that Israel, especially in the Old Testament, throughout their early history, right up through their generations, was promised some pretty incredible blessings by the God of Israel, aka Yahweh. And this was all in relation to the covenant that they had with them, that first covenant, that old covenant. And these people, these covenant people, Israel, the apple of God's eye, were promised blessing upon blessing upon blessing. And all they had to do was make sure that they kept him first. That's it. They just had to keep Yahweh above the gods and not fall into idolatry and not worship false gods, and Yahweh would take care of them. He would bless them abundantly. If you read the story and you take notice of the things that he promised that were part of that old covenant, that is supposedly far worse than the covenant that people believe they're in today, you can see that some of the things that Yahweh promised his old covenant people were abundance. Abundance of food, abundance of grain, abundance of water. He promised them that he would give them a land flowing with milk and honey. In other words, abundance. It would be lacking nothing. It would be lush and fruitful. They would never want or lack anything. He promised them protection. This is big. He promised them protection from their enemies. Anyone who came against them, he promised, would be shot down, would be cast down, would be destroyed utterly. And actually, we see that happen a lot. Right from the beginning, actually, we see it happen in Egypt, where he destroys the Egyptians. He kills all the firstborn males and lays on these Egyptians these horrific plagues, which, by the way, are nowhere mentioned in Egyptian history, by the way. Just a little tidbit I'd throw in there. But anyways, that's another story for another day. But Yahweh provides abundance. He provides severe protection for his people in the Old Covenant. They were the apple of his eye. He would bang you up if you touch them, right? So protection from their enemies. He even said that he would cast away all their sicknesses. He even said he would lay their sicknesses on other peoples. These are his old covenant people, right? And that the people who are supposedly part of that worse old covenant that cannot compare to the covenant today. So these people had tremendous, tremendous blessing, or at least promise of tremendous, tremendous blessing, and all they had to do was love the Lord their God and keep him first. Just don't worship false gods. Don't worship idols. Just worship Yahweh and all would be good. Abide by his laws and commandments and keep him first. Obey the covenant. So that old covenant came with many blessings. Abundance, food, water, blessing, protection, health, prosperity even promised them prosperity. And you can see these things taking place throughout Israel's history on and off. When the people were doing the right thing, they were blessed abundantly. When the people weren't, they were cursed. They were punished. But the point is that I want you to take notice of the earthly blessings that the old covenant people had. Okay? Now, if you think about what people's claims are today as part of this so-called new covenant, which, by the way, was only made with Israel. If you go read Romans 11:25-27, the new covenant was only made with Israel. It wasn't made with anybody else. And all Israel was saved by the coming. All Israel was fully forgiven of their sins and fully saved by the coming of Israel's Redeemer, said Paul in Romans 11:25-27. So if you hold to Israel's Redeemer, aka Christ, returning for them when he said he did, then by necessity or by default, all Israel was saved and forgiven by that coming. So nobody can be any form of Israel, whether physical, spiritual, it doesn't matter. Nobody can be any form of an Israelite being saved, being forgiven, being anything today. Because the full body of Israelites, the full body of spiritual Israel, if you will, the true Israel of God, was forgiven, saved, sealed, and delivered. Signed, sealed, delivered, I'm yours. Whoever sang that. Similar to that. They were signed, sealed, delivered, and they were his. Alright, and whoever that entailed, they were fully wrapped up by the coming. So the new covenant had nothing to do with anybody but the elect of Jacob, Israel. Go read Romans 11:25-27 and see it for yourselves. He established his new covenant with Jacob. All Jacob was saved and forgiven by his coming. But people believe that they're part of that new covenant today. They believe, many of them, that they are a spiritual Israelite by faith today who was forgiven and saved. But of course that clashes with what Paul said when he said all Israel would be forgiven and saved by the coming. So nobody's in any new covenant today. That's the reality of it. Okay, but they often say that the new covenant that they're in, or they suppose they're in, is a glorious and much better covenant than the old one. Excuse me. And the reason they do this is because A, they think they're in the covenant, and B, they look at passages like the one in Hebrews, which states that the new covenant was built on better promises, or I can't remember if it's Hebrews, it might be, I don't know. But there's a couple passages in the New Testament that state that the new covenant was much better, and it had way more power. You know, the powers of the age to come, which Jesus said only those worthy to attain to it could actually attain. Again, showing that nobody's in the age to come today but them. But they think they're in this new covenant that is supposedly far, far better than the old covenant that the Israelites had. But remember, I showed you, and I didn't show you from the passages because I'm driving, but I don't need to. If you're a halfway decent Bible student, you know exactly what I'm talking about and all these promises that were linked to Israel's old covenant. Abundance, blessing, food, water, protection, health, prosperity, everything. So remember that that's part of the old covenant. Now this new covenant is supposed to be glorious and far better and way more powerful and all this, that, and the other. But yet, Christians today, for the most part, are not blessed that way. Right? So, you know, do Christians today, everywhere, worldwide, have what God promised his old covenant people? Do they have blessing, abundance, food, water, health, prosperity, protection? Of course not. Hell no, they don't. Maybe in America they do, and even that, a lot of them don't. A lot of them are poor, unhealthy, dying of disease, murdered. If you go to foreign countries, that's even worse, right? If you go to places like Africa and all the places, you know, within there that are just stricken with poverty and just the most harsh living conditions that you could imagine, yet, you know, you get these compassion industry, you know, requests to sponsor a child who loves Jesus, right? and they got nothing, right? $50 a month can sponsor a child who supposedly gave his life to Christ, and that $50 can sponsor that child and give him something to survive, because they don't even have food or water. They have no clothes, they can't afford schooling. So these are the Christians, right? Never mind the Christians who are killed by Muslims or whatever it might be, right? Murdered by terrorists, who knows, right? I mean, that goes on. Who knows where or why or how or the details, but we know it does go on. But what's going on with these people, right? I mean, Yahweh promised that his new covenant would be far superior to the old. But in the old, they were promised all these earthly blessings, right? All this protection, all this health, all this wealth, all this abundance, all this grain, all this water, all this sustenance. If anybody messed with them, they would be wiped out. And honestly, the only condition to that was to keep Yahweh first, to not worship other gods, to obey his commandments. Now, if you look at the Christians today, do Christians worship other gods? No. Do Christians obey Yahweh? Yeah, for the most part. Do Christians put any idols before Yahweh, like false gods, like the Israelites did in the Old Covenant? No. You can't even talk to a Christian about any other God, right? They're sold out for Yahweh. They're sold out for Christ. So in terms of fulfilling the condition, Christians today are light years ahead of the Old Covenant Israelites. Yet they have none of the same blessings. None of them. Right? Now, the argument is always as follows. Well, the new and better covenant doesn't pertain to the earth. It doesn't pertain to the here and now. It's a spiritual covenant, and it pertains to spiritual things. Heavenly things. The afterlife. Right? And that's what they've got people to buy into. This is what people believe. But then, at the same token, these people, especially in the full preterist camp, they'll tell people that the kingdom is here on earth. The kingdom is here and now on earth. Come in, enjoy the waters, come drink the water. The kingdom is here on earth. Excuse me. The kingdom is here and now, folks. Come on in. Enjoy the blessings of being in that kingdom. Well, if there's no physical earthly blessings, if there's nothing tied to the here and now, like the Old Covenant Israelites were promised, then how is the kingdom on earth today, right? In what sense is this so-called imaginary kingdom here on earth if there are no earthly blessings attached to it? All right? I mean, doesn't really make much sense. But instead, they've got people to believe that the kingdom is here on earth, yet there's no real promise of blessing here on earth. The only promise of blessing is in the afterlife. Man, talk about a good salesman, right? I mean, they've got millions of people to buy into this. Let me repeat that. This is what they believe. Okay, the kingdom is here on earth. Most people believe that, right? Most Christians. The futurists are just confused. They don't even know what direction is up or down. But a lot of them do believe the kingdom is here on earth. A lot of the confused futurists. But so they believe the kingdom is here on earth. These people. They say that the new covenant that they're in is far better than the old. Yet there's no earthly blessings that are tied to it. Right? The abundance, the food, the wealth, the water, the prosperity, the protection, the health, the laying your sicknesses on other people, on their enemies. There's none of that. None of that is attached to the new and better covenant. The only thing that is promised in the new and better covenant is things that nobody has any proof even exist. Right? A heavenly place, an afterlife. That's the new and better covenant. So, I don't understand how the covenant can be so glorious and so far better, excuse me, if Yahweh was super concerned with their earthly living conditions and their earthly situation in the Old Covenant. Right? I mean, okay, so the Old Covenant contained many earthly blessings, but this supposed New Covenant doesn't care about the earthly blessings. It basically says, you know what? You can suck it up and stick it out while you're here on earth and deal with whatever comes, whatever sickness. You get cancer, it's all right. Don't worry about it. You're broke, you can't afford your mortgage, you get kicked out, you're evicted, you're homeless. That's all right. Don't worry about it. You're living in Africa and can't even afford rice and water to eat, and your ribs are sticking out of your stomach, but you believe in Jesus. That's all right. It's not about the here and now. It's about the afterlife. It just seems like they've been sold a really shitty deal. And they buy into it because people are desperate to believe in it. So, just something to think about, folks. A lot of people don't know their Bibles, of course. Probably 95% of Christians don't know their Bibles. And out of that 95%, probably 95% of those don't even read their Bibles. If they read their Bibles, they would get a real first-hand look at how God treated the Israelites under the Old Covenant arrangement. And they'd see just the amount of blessing, prosperity, protection, and wealth that was promised to them. And then they could look at this supposed New Covenant that they think Christians are in today, and they could see exactly how far off that is. None of those things exist. For Joel Osteen, they exist. I mean, dude, that guy's got money. Right? He must be one of the only true elect ones. But for the majority of Christians today, the strong majority, these things are just not a reality. Health, wealth, prosperity, abundance of this, abundance of that, protection from enemies, protection from harm. Those things are just not a reality. The 7 Pentecostal children, ranging in ages 5 to 10, that were slammed into by a truck about a month ago on the highway, down, I believe it was in Florida, as they were driving to Disney World, a church group of children went up in a fiery ball of flames in the most horrific scene you could imagine, and none of them survived. So where is the protection and blessing for those ones, right? These Christians who are part of the new and better covenant. Now people will say, oh, well, that's a lesson. All things work together for the good, right? But those children, those 5 to 10, however many there were, Pentecostal so-called Christians who were just shown on film bowing down at the altar not even a week or two before this happened. Those Christian children didn't have any clue what happened to them. They didn't even know. It hit them like a ton of bricks, and they were dead before they could even blink their eyes. And the wacky Christian pastor will tell you that all things work together. Excuse me. And that God did that for a specific reason, to teach somebody a lesson. They'll say, oh, well, that's going to eventually teach someone a lesson. It's okay. Those 7 deaths of those innocent children who had lives ahead of them, doesn't matter, because Uncle Carl came to Christ through it. Give me a break. Give me a break. The parents of those children, the families of those children, the friends of those children, the fellow congregation members of those children will all live many years, if not the rest of their lives, in agony, pain, depression, and confusion over this so-called act of God. Right? So what's going on? Aren't they part of the new and better covenant? Why weren't they protected? They surely were not putting other gods in front of Yahweh. I can assure you of that. So why were these ones not protected like the Israelites were promised to be protected in the Old Covenant? This is, after all, the new and better covenant. But again, none of that matters. It's all about the afterlife. You can get shot in the head 74 times, stabbed with a knife 120 times, hung on a tree, and then set afire, or set ablaze, I should say. And none of that would matter, right? Because you're in the glorious new and better covenant. You're going somewhere glorious. So none of this stuff even matters anymore. Folks, I'm not trying to be Debbie Downer here, but I am trying you to get thinking critically about some of the claims that these people make. If this was a new and better covenant, it would possess some of the blessings that God promised his first covenant people, that being the earthly blessings. Because remember, the kingdom is on earth. The kingdom is here on earth. They're inviting people into the kingdom. So then what is that? If the kingdom is here on earth, what is it? If God is not providing blessing and different abundance and protection and health on earth, then what is the kingdom here on earth? And what are you doing in it? None of it makes sense at all. Anyways, that's about all I'm going to say for today. Just wanted you to think about that a little bit. We'll be back another day, another time, another place, and another rhyme. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.